What's up, Hoosier Nation? Welcome back to episode 14 of the Rock Report. It's your host, Ricky Tamus, here with Sean Ratcher. We're going to dive into the Ohio State game this weekend, but we're going to start this off. We're talking a little about NIL, a few quarterbacks. We had two big commitments on Thursday, the 21st. Um, you could say Juju Lewis is a five-star. So let's say there's two five-star commitments, one to Michigan, Bryce Underwood, and then Colorado and Dion. We're replacing Shadur with Juju Lewis. So a lot of that has to do with NIL. We've heard a lot of talks NIL is a bad thing, but quite frankly, I think NIL is a pretty good thing. So Sean, let's talk about those two quarterback commits.
Yeah, starting off with Juju Lewis, you look back, a lot of people were thinking he was going to Indiana. We had a little inside scoop, didn't leak it, knew that what he was doing, he kept scheduling these visits and he didn't show up, kept stringing people on online, on three sports, 24/7, telling them he's going on an Indiana visit. Really what he was doing the whole time was using USC and Indiana to leverage Colorado. So whatever they gave him clearly worked out for him. I mean, I don't think he was the greatest fit for Indiana. I think that we probably will go the direction of another transfer after this year, and then on the Michigan side, Bryce Underwood reportedly $10 million NIL contract. Dave Portnoy, I think, threw 3 million in there. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. We're talking $10 million for an 18-year-old to go to Michigan and play football. No guarantees he ever plays, no guarantees that he ever wins a game. I mean, it's nuts the way this thing's trending.
It's one of those things that when you look at it, Bryce Underwood is a Michigan kid from Michigan. If you looked at his recruiting video, he's like probably 8 years old, and he's talking about doing that LeBron, I'm going to take my talents to the Wolverines. If you think about recruiting, you think about a kid like that, number one quarterback in his class, they've just set the precedent of 10, he got $10.5 million for for 4 years. That's kind of the number that's floating around right now. You've set that precedent for the number one player in the class, that number one quarterback. That's how much that quarterback's position is worth. So when people talk about NIL ruining the sport, I think they're really talking about as we the rich get richer. It's gonna be hard for some schools. Not everyone can just cough up $2.2 million a year for a kid. So when you think about it's 2.7, or you're thinking about that, when people talk about NIL as being a bad thing, it's what NIL is going to be, and schools are going to start, and we've seen Hoosiers Connect kind of start actually utilizing NIL in a way that gets a 10-0 football team. So you're going to see schools, the top level schools, are going to kind of separate themselves with NIL. And I personally don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing by any means. I think that as a whole, Power Five is probably going to separate itself from G5 fairly quickly here as we get into revenue share and NIL continues to grow. My issue becomes a little bit just the numbers off the top. I think it's hard when you have a business that there's really no way to put a true value on what a player brings to the program. So if a quarterback this year is making, you know, 2.7, 5 years from now, what does that look like? How does this scale? And essentially, I don't really understand what these collectives and coaches come up with to determine that some 18-year-old kid is worth $2.7 million a year. To me, it just seems like somehow this started with name, image, and likeness. Famous players that played college football can make money using their name in commercials and to sell products on their Instagram page. And Cam Jones' nickname was C4. He could have had a C4 deal, things like that. But now this whole NIL landscape has trended towards these collectives, which has absolutely nothing to do with name, image, or likeness. It's really just paying players, which I understand they used to do it illegally, but this thing's got out of control way too quickly. I mean, Indiana's going into a game this weekend with Ohio State. Ohio State is a $20 million NIL fund for their football team. I mean, It's absurd. We have sub 10 and we're paying probably half of our team compared to you got 20 million bucks. I mean, how much do you want? You're the starting quarterback at Ohio State. You could probably get 2 or 3 million pretty easily.
I guess we saw some stuff early in the season with that UNLV quarterback kind of not getting what he's promised. That kind of stuff is going to be a little controversial. But at the same time, like you just said, where is this number coming from? How do you know Bryce Underwood? Like, what is your formula that you pay him? Let's say that $10.5 million across 4 years. How much money does he bring in? How much production does he bring? A big thing with this, it's one of those things. I mean, he was committed to LSU. I'm sure they were floating around numbers of what LSU was paying him. So you want to kind of up that number. And then he brings in those. I mean, you're the number one quarterback. He is going to bring a lot of new recruits to that Michigan class. It's something to look at as we go forward in NIL. And yeah, in 5 years, just like 5 years ago, they said NIL was never going to be a thing because then it makes these students, they're no longer amateur athletes. So let's see what happens 5 years from now. It's going to be really interesting to look at.
Yeah, I understand that aspect, and see where we came from of the whole amateurism issue, but in all reality, it doesn't matter. And I think they thought it would mean a lot more than it did. And I think the NCAA has quickly realized their place in college football and their place in college sports is slowly withering away. The oversight committees that the NCAA has in place are just excessive. I mean, we're paying a player $2.5 million, $2.7 million a year, and they're worried about Jim Harbaugh giving a kid a cheeseburger on a recruiting visit. I mean, at some point, they've just got to say, okay, we're here to manage the playoffs and the March Madness tournaments and the recruiting periods, but some of the rules are just absurd that go on within the walls of a college athletics stadium.
It's something that a lot of people who aren't like in that seat like we were, you see a lot more behind closed doors. But it's time to dive into the biggest game of the Indiana football season. And I'm sorry to say this, but it's not because it's the next one. The Indiana Hoosiers go to Columbus this weekend at noon. We have big noon kickoff, college game day, top five matchup. And it quite frankly is the biggest game of the season because it is a top five matchup and there's a lot of playoff implications in this game. And who knows what would happen in rankings with Indiana beating Ohio State. So, as we know, kind of the line is right now, it's down to 11 and a half points. Ohio State's favored with 51 and a half over under total points. But let's dive into that game. First, I want to talk about the key to Ohio State. They like to start games fast. They haven't really done that this season, but IU has only allowed 13 points in the first quarter. If we're kind of able to disrupt Will Howard and that offense in the first quarter, it might be a long day for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I think starting off, you got to understand this Ohio State offensive line is not the most impressive they've had. They're pretty much one deep, and it's at tackle. So you take a look at our interior guys that have done so well this year. I think if we can put pressure on early, we can throw that offense off. The hard part with Ohio State is they're firing in just about all cylinders. You take a look at their passing game, been pretty good the past few weeks. Their run game's pretty solid, and they have guys that are talented enough that they can work with a bad O line. So I really don't expect this game to lean heavy one way or the other. I think it'll be a shootout.
Ohio State's definitely gonna gotta go to what they know. I don't think they're gonna change anything up. They're gonna have a nice mix and balance with run pass. I know Seth McLaughlin's out. They do have an All-American left guard, Donovan Jackson, that they had to move to left tackle. We saw him struggle a little bit against Abdul Carter in that Penn State game. And Mikhail Kamara is just, he's got 53 pressures on the season. He is a force to be reckoned with, 9 sacks. They're going to have to do a little mixing and matching, especially with Seth McLaughlin going out this week with that Achilles injury. They're going to have to plug and play some guys. Quite frankly, we're probably going to see like I'd say a rotation of 7 guys on that offensive line now that they pretty much out almost 3 true starters.
Yeah, I mean, taking a look from top down, they've got a younger group, and I think especially interior, their guards and centers, having to bump him out to tackle has really opened up the doors for some of these younger guys. And for them, it's a lot of in-state guys that I really didn't expect to play, but are playing early on. And that group's led by an IU alum in Justin Fry that a lot of us really thought was going to get a shot at the head coaching job here at IU.
So talking about a little about that, their offensive line struggles, we have to talk about that quarterback, Will Howard. He's a great pocket passer, pretty mobile, 6 touchdowns on the ground this year. He's kind of match for work. He's got 18 touchdowns with his arm, but he's one of the top rated deep ball throwers in the country. And kind of, they have an explosive offense with Jeremiah Smith. And I've been hearing a lot of talk with Jeremiah Smith's explosive ability and his big playability. They on our Indiana side, we have D'Angelo Pons, who's 5'9", and quite frankly, he's played 22 games in his career. He's 2 years starter, and he's a great DB. I don't think that size is going to be an issue, and we've heard Jake Butt talk about it on Big Ten today, that that's a matchup to look for with that size difference. But I really don't think it's going to be an issue. D'Angelo Pons has kind of gone one-on-one all season, and it's been great for the Hoosiers.
Yeah, one concern for me on that front is really D'Angelo Pons might be able to have a great game, but the Ohio State receiving core this year and historically is top tier, best in the nation almost every single year, first round draft picks almost every single year. I think their power is they can spread the ball out because they've got so many guys. And I think on defense, we've played really well at DB so far this year, but this is a group that we really have not faced anything up to this level. I mean, we saw Colston Loveland, the tight end from Michigan, was probably the best pass catcher we played so far this year. And frankly, in that first half, he was almost unstoppable. I mean, there was a couple drives there where he caught 3, 4, 5 balls in a row, nobody within 5 yards of him, just because his route running ability is so strong. I really think that our safeties this week are going to have to play a great game because the DBs are going to have some struggles. I don't even know if I would say struggles. The DBs are going to have a challenge ahead of them.
Let's kind of move over to the offensive side of the ball for the Hoosiers. We've seen Curtis Rourke has been amazing all year. He's got the fourth highest QBR in the country in a clean pocket. We're going to have to look at the big matchup of this week is offensive line versus defensive line. And we're returning a few starters on our offensive line from last year with Mike Kadick and Carter Smith. And Ohio State's returning 4 of their starters from last year, 2 of the top defensive ends in the country, Jack Sawyer and JT Tiamalu. And the interior D lineman, Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton, are big guys, and they've been there. They're not up to the standard of those 2 interior, Mason Graham and Kenneth and on Michigan, but they're still very good players, and they're very disruptive in the middle.
Yeah, Jack Sawyer is definitely got to take a look at. We have really not faced a guy this year that will be a true outside linebacker, edge rush, flex kind of guy in the NFL. He is going to be a challenge for our tackles in a way that he's probably a quarter of a second faster on a 40-yard dash than any guy they've faced this season. I mean, he's potentially one of the most athletic guys in this draft, likely first round pick, and has been a problem for every team he's faced so far this season. And then moving inside, they've got first round picks just as much as Michigan does. I mean, they continually put out really good interior D linemen. So I think what it comes down to is communication. This is going to be a huge game for Mike Kadick, just communicating to the other guys, making sure their reads are always correct. Because this is not a game where we can have a play where they mess up. This is going to be a game that comes down to 1 or 2 big plays that pull one team ahead of the other, whether it's early on or late.
Indiana gave up 3 sacks at that second half of the Michigan game. A lot of those sacks were just kind of communication errors, but we're coming off a bye week. They've had a lot of time to train, a lot of film to watch. We do need to talk about Oregon beating Ohio State. Ohio State's one loss. In that loss, Dillon Gabriel threw the ball all over the field. I mean, 341 yards and accounted for 3 total touchdowns, only 1 being on the ground. So 2 passing touchdowns. a lot of explosive plays for anyone who's watching that. If Rourke is able to stay protected, if he's able to have enough time, we're going to see some big shot plays from the Indiana Hoosiers. They have nothing to lose. They're going to throw everything out there in this game. They don't need to put anything, they don't need to hide anything from Purdue in that bucket game, but they're going to throw a lot of different looks on the field this week, and they're going to have a lot of different shot plays and trying to. You got to score quick and you got to score big plays.
Yeah, definitely a week to watch Curtis Rourke. We're looking at a little bit of snow, some cold weather down in Columbus, and he is still only 2, 3 weeks out from having a procedure on his thumb. Cold weather and procedures usually do not mesh well together. I'll be surprised to see if he goes back to the glove this weekend, and they're probably going to have him heated up pretty well every time he's on the sideline because this is not a game where he can have any little issue going on with injuries. And what it comes down to is can the O line continually protect him? And what does the play calling look like? This is not a game where you really want to see him scramble and run very much. I mean, these guys are very, very talented. They're going to contain him well. So his internal clock's got to be on point, probably a little bit quick this weekend. And then from there, I think it's a good game for Shanahan to just let it all go. Be crafty. Anything you've got deep in the playbook, trick plays, different sets you haven't worked before, now's the time. I mean, the entire season is on the line this weekend. This is by far the most important game in the history of IU football since probably the 1968 Rose Bowl.
We're definitely going to see trick plays. I mean, we scored against Ohio State back in the past with trick plays. I don't think we're going to have a whole game of trick plays, but in 2019, I mean, we got blown out 56-7, I believe. We had one trick play to P. Henny that scored a touchdown, so we didn't get 50 balled in a shutout. But let's dive into our matchups of the week. I'm going to go with JT versus Carter Smith, defensive end versus left tackle. I think that's the highlight to watch of this game. Carter Smith had his first start of his career 3 years ago in Columbus versus JT when JT was an older player. Carter was a true freshman. His first ever live action in such a big stage. He is ready for the moment. Really excited to see that matchup. What are you looking for, Sean?
Yeah, my big matchup of the week is Caleb Downs in the Ohio State defensive backcourt against Elijah Surratt and the Indiana receivers. I mean, this is probably the two most talented respective cores in this league right now going head to head. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody's proven their worth. And I was talking to a couple guys over at the Hoosiers Connect Collective this week. The money on the line in terms of NFL contracts in this football game is absolutely massive. If some of these Indiana guys can prove their worth against an Ohio State football team filled with projected draft picks, you will see the stock of a lot of these guys rise. On the contrary, if guys on Indiana or guys in Ohio State are getting burnt by the other guy, their stock might drop pretty quickly if they get exposed.
There's a lot more on the line than just wins and losses on the record. There's a lot of players' kind of careers on the line in a sense of draft pick and kind of their projections. There's two true regular season games left in the season, but it's time for our pick of the week. Gonna throw out our point spread and all that. I think this is gonna be a really close game. I think there's a 50% chance that in this Indiana blows Ohio State as well as Ohio State blowing out Indiana. But I do think this is going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. I say it's going to be an under one possession game. I have the Hoosiers winning by 3 points, a field goal. I know it's not going to be a game winning field goal. I just think they're going to have that 3 point win. I'm going to go with 35-32.
Interesting numbers there. 32 points. All right. I
I
would
gotta make
say,
it 3 point spread. So
yeah, off the top, I'm thinking that these defenses are both pretty strong for both teams. Offense is also pretty strong. I mean, all around a great football game on both sides of the football. I think it stays tight though. I'm taking Indiana 31-28. I think Ohio State has a little bit of struggles early on that Indiana capitalizes on scoring in the first quarter And I'm not sure you see Ohio State come back from that, but I think it stays tight.
Definitely. And fans of the Rock Report, fans of Indiana football, Ohio State, Indiana in Columbus, biggest game of the year because it's the next one. Also, it's a top 5 matchup. Big noon kickoff will be there. College game day will be there. Just super awesome atmosphere in Columbus. Go Hoosiers.
Yeah, tune into Spectrum News in Columbus this week. Little interview. They're doing a story on the Indiana guys that played in Ohio, so I had a nice interview on there. And then on a little bit more of a sad note, just thoughts and prayers are with Rowan McCullough, former long snapper at Ohio State. His brother's a long snapper now for the Falcons. He was in a near fatal car accident a couple days ago. There's GoFundMe links online, but super excited to be in Columbus this weekend, be back around Indiana football, and just see an incredible matchup. Excited to see, is this program what we think it is? I truly believe it is. And I believe this is the matchup to prove this program's worth. This is hundreds of years of Indiana University and Indiana football proving themselves on a 4-hour slate in Columbus, Ohio at noon this Saturday. Go Hoosiers. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the game.